She is currently running GSOC and various Google coding and other programs, and is in the Google Open Source Programs Office, where I hear she came to be enlightened after 4 years of toiling in the horrifying sweatshop called Googleplex.
Thank you.
Probably be nice to her. I believe she's scarred by that experience.
Sorry guys, talk amongst yourselves for a second here. Anybody know any good jokes? Too many software engineers change a light bulb. None, it's a hardware problem.
You're not alone. As long as you don't have a Mac. Sorry.
It's okay, I actually have. Can you guys hear me? Is this on? How about this? It's on.
Yeah.
Is that better? Great. Okay.
To the cloud.
I actually have a Chrome laptop now that I'm planning to take to all of my conferences this summer, so nobody gives me any crap for having a MacBook anymore. Alright, so this worked when I tried it 10 minutes ago, so in theory that means it should not work now, right? Oh, yeah, that worked. I was too impatient. Sorry, guys. So I have some questions for the room that I can do while I'm futzing with this, which is there anybody in this room who hasn't heard of GSOC, Google Summer Code? Okay, great, awesome. That's a good start. Okay. Oh. No, that's not going to work very well, is it? Let's try this one more time. How many of you have either been a mentor, an org admin, or a student in GSOC? So you've all heard of it, but only some of you have participated. There we go. Hooray. Okay, it's fixed. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Carol Smith, and I work at Google. And as Jeff said, I actually spent 4 years toiling in our operations department, and got a little fed up with that, and decided to move on in the world. I can actually move on in these slides, because I want to tell you about myself for a little while. So I'm here to talk about KDE and education today. I find education to be both a sore point and a really interesting point for me in my day-to-day life, and I'm really interested in getting into the world of education. I grew up in Los Angeles, and I went to public schools in LA, and I never had any exposure whatsoever to computer science or much less open source software. I mean, that kind of would have been shooting the moon at that point if I had been exposed to open source software. But I had a computers class when I was in elementary school that was on an Apple IIe, and that was about the extent of the computer exposure that I got in my education. And so my opinions now on education and computer science are kind of jaded by the whole experience. I was lucky though, because my parents really thought that this computer thing was going to take off. And so when I was a kid, we had a web TV. Has anybody heard of the web TV? The web TV is notable in my history simply for the fact that it introduced me to this idea of a chat room. And I thought this was the best thing ever. There's this whole community of people that I never have to actually talk to in person who still think I'm interesting. And this was like the best thing ever. I also had an Apple IIe when I was growing up. My parents, we had a whole bunch of education programs, and I got really interested in computers from a very young age. But after the web TV, we got a machine running Windows 95, and I think it was 200 megahertz, and we were quite proud of that at the time. And suddenly I discovered the internet, and I had my personal aha moment about computers and that sort of thing was actually with HTML. So I'm sorry to all of you who actually do real coding. But suddenly I discovered that I could view the source of a web page, I could replicate it, and I could make it something different that I wanted it to be. And this was kind of an amazing thing to me, and it was quite empowering. And I realize HTML is kind of not the most empowering language in the whole world, but for me it was a really eye-opening experience and made a big difference in the way I viewed computers from then on, because it meant that I could fix my own problems, and I could change my view of how I was interacting with the rest of the internet, basically. So I spent a couple of years as a GeoCities community manager for. Was anybody in here in GeoCities? All right, awesome. A couple. Yeah, I made a ton of web pages, all of which had really no content whatsoever, except for the fact that they were online and they were in web rings. And I was a community leader for a couple years, and that was my first experience in community management. And look at me now. So why I got involved in Google and in Summer of Code and in education and all of this stuff, as I kind of alluded to, computers and development on computers empowers people. When you can fix your problems, it changes your worldview. And sorry, I cannot emphasize that enough. And I know all of you, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but you guys all understand this, but being able to fix your own problems on a computer kind of changes the way that you interact with the world. And secondly, I want to get everyone working in open source software. I think proprietary software, I'm going to take the Google hat off here for a second. Proprietary software is evil. And I want everyone to be working in open source software. My not so secret plan to take over the world is that I think that every student in any university anywhere in the world should be able to major in open source software. If you're interested in computer science, you should be able to have at least a minor in open source, if not a major. And I would, if I move on from GSOC, which I never will because I'll be doing this for the rest of my life, but if I ever did, I think that my next move would probably be into university education and curriculum and trying to get more and more open source into the schools. And also, I am a consumer of open source software. I use VideoLAN at home. I use open source software every day of my life, and I have for a long time, and even well before I got interested in GSOC and the community, I was still using open source software. So I'd like to talk a little bit about education in the US, and I will take this moment to apologize to all of you who are not from the US, because you guys have it much better than we do.
What?
I
love you guys.
Fair enough, understandable. But I think that education in the U.S. is sorely lacking, and particularly with regard to CS and open source software. So, as far as I'm concerned, there are two simultaneous battles being fought right now. One is we need more computer science education overall in the United States, just across the board in pre-university and university. It needs to be emphasized more. And that is one battle that is being fought, and unfortunately, it's somewhat being won by corporations that want to infect students with proprietary software. And so the second battle is kind of getting, I guess, maybe a little lost. It's hard to say right now, but the second battle is getting students more exposure to open source software, because even the kids in schools today who do have exposure to a computer class or a advanced placement computer science class in their high school or what have you, are learning Microsoft Word and packages that they don't ever get to see the code. They basically just learn how to be word processors or work on spreadsheets or what have you. And these are both problems. I think the first is slightly more important, but the second, we need the second to be FOF as well, and I'm sure you guys understand that. So pre-university education in the US, I think, is really sad right now. And it's the reason that I actually think that Google Code-In is actually a more important program than Google Summer of Code. And don't let Chris hear that I said that. I think that one of the most important things, and going back to my aha moment from earlier, one of the most important things is getting people exposed to open source software young. If you're already in university, I think that you're a lot less likely to say, hey, what is this open source thing and how can I get involved in this community? Whereas if you are exposed to it very young, hopefully by your parents, but even if not by your parents, in your junior high or high school curriculum, I think you're a lot more likely to stay with it for the rest of your life, to make it a hobby or to make it part of your work life or what have you. And unfortunately, a lot of students aren't getting exposed to computers at all in the United States right now in their pre-university education. And particularly, if they are getting exposed, it's to proprietary software. Microsoft has a big stake in wanting all their students in their pre-university education to get exposed to the Office suite and not to actually be empowered to change the code and fix it and submit bugs. And oh, by the way, there's an entire community of people who would like to hang out with you and talk to you. And so I actually did a big push last winter to start up Google Code-In, which I'm sure most of you know is previously the Google Highly Open Participation Contest, because this was my sort of personal, this is a really important program and I'm willing to take on all of the extra work that I had to expend on it in order to get it going. Because I think when a 13-year-old has an aha moment about, oh, this is what Python is and this is what I can do with Python, I think that's a much more monumental impact than, and I think GSOC is a great program, that's why I run it, but I think Google Code-In, I think the impact that it can make is much bigger and much broader. Did anybody in here mentor for Google Code-In? Oh, couple, okay, awesome, thank you. Did you have a good time? Good. Did we get KDE developers out of it? Yes. Okay. Awesome. Good. Unfortunately, I think one of the things I've been hearing about Google Code-In is that sure, it's awesome that the kids want to participate in this contest, but then they need to go back to school and they don't really have time to hobby around with computers and coding. So I don't think that the retention of them is quite as much, but I think the fact that they were exposed is what matters. So universities in the US. Again, lots of CS majors are getting exposure to proprietary software, and these two kind of tie hand in hand for me. I think if you get exposure to open source software into communities early on, before university, that you're probably a lot more likely to, for example, major in CS when you're in college, or even if you don't major in CS, you're at least more likely to be involved in an open source community or submitting patches back upstream to whatever cool project it is that you work on in your free time, that sort of thing. I think the communities part of this is really the key component. I mean, a lot of students get interested and involved in GSOC for the money, but they stay because they have this whole community of people who are like-minded and doing interesting things, and they want to keep participating in that. And that seems like a perfectly great hook for university students. I mean, these are people who are prime for wanting more culture, more engagement, more personal interaction. They've probably just moved out from living with their parents, and this is a prime time to get to say, hey, there's all these people online who'd like to talk to you and interact with you, and here's all these cool things that you can do for yourself and for this project that you're interested in. And I actually don't know that we emphasize that enough to university students as a whole. I mean, not particular to KDE, but I think in our it's sort of the open source message, it's all about the code, and I think we're getting better at it. We're certainly getting better at it, but this is a great time to tell a university student, hey, there's 100 people on this mailing list in this IRC channel who would love to chat with you about what you did last night at the bar. And, oh, by the way, you could be doing all this cool stuff with code as well. And as a whole, I just want to say again, like the state of education in the U.S. is really sad, and Google has a lot of initiatives going on right now to try and fix education in the U.S. or at least try and help it a little, of which GSOC is a very, very tiny little sliver. But I think I mean, all of the numbers tell us that we are going to have a lot more jobs in CS in the U.S. Every year from starting now until probably 2020, where we're not going to have the qualified candidates to fill it, and that's a shame. And we could be doing more to fix that. So there is some good news. I want to do a shout out to the teaching open source people, because I think they are doing some really, really great work. I don't know if you guys have seen teachingopensource.org, but it's an awesome, obviously all online set of resources where they're trying to come up with, for example, a high school textbook for teaching open source software. One of the complaints that a lot of high school teachers in the U.S. have is basically we don't have a textbook that we can just plop down on the desk and say, this is how you teach open source. And I'm sure that if we tried to bike shed that, it would take us the next decade to actually figure out what the textbook should look like. But these guys are trying to come up with something that kind of resembles a textbook, so that you can go to a teacher in a high school and you can say, here's your curriculum, and here's your lesson plans, and here's how you can teach open source software to your students right now. It needs to be as easy as possible. I did a whole circuit of talking to high schools to promote Google Code in this past fall, and over the thing that I heard is, we would love to be teaching more computer science, we would love to be teaching more open source, but you need to make it easy for us. And it's not easy right now. They can't just plug in and say, hey, this is my lesson plan for how I teach this particular topic today. And so there's a lot of materials available online on this particular topic. And so I think they are doing some great work, and if you were interested in contributing to them, you would be absolutely welcome. So I'm actually a little surprised that open source isn't more common in, and again, this is just for the US today, more common in schools, because open source has gotten really trendy. Corporations love to say that they're working on open source software now. It makes a lot of sense. Jem's keynote from yesterday, it's very true that it makes a lot more sense to simply just spin up some virtual instances and start coding in open source software than to try and buy a proprietary software suite and build it that way. And it should be everywhere. So this seems to be a problem that we can solve, I hope. So a little bit about Google, and since I already took my poll, I will not give you guys the little history of GSOC, since I'm sure you've all heard it. But I do just want to take a second to say that the reason that GSOC started is because Larry Page looked around the company and he said, wow, okay, every computer that's running Google.com right now in the entire world, in every data center, is running Linux. And we could be giving back to the community, and this would be a nice thing. And we've got some money, and we could, something could happen here. And hey, university students need summer internships. This seems like a very sensible solution to the problem. And how I got into the program. So I had actually heard about Google Summer of Code when I started at Google in 2005. And I looked at the program and I said, oh my god, that is an awesome program that I could never possibly be qualified to run. Because it's this huge community management, it involves lots of developers all over the world. I couldn't possibly be qualified to do that. I actually started at Google as an administrative assistant, and then I moved into network operations and became a project manager when I was after about a year of being an administrative assistant. And at the time when I went into network operations, the sum total of what I knew about networks was I knew what an IP address was. That was all. And I had no previous experience as a project manager. So I was perfectly suited for the job. And by the end of it, I had helped build out a lot of the long-haul optical fiber networks on the West Coast between Portland and Seattle and San Francisco, and between some of the data centers that we have in the Midwest, and had managed tens of millions of dollars of projects. And that gave me a little more hope that I could actually get involved in this program. And so I went out to lunch with Leslie Hawthorne and said, hey, this is a really awesome program. Is there anything that I can do to help? And she says, why are you interested? And I said, because I want to change the world. And she said, well, I've been thinking about leaving Google. Would you like a job? And I said, sure, that sounds like fun. And of course, I knew nothing about community management at the time, and so I was, again, perfectly suited for the position. But this has kind of been, again, like I said, like this has been something that I've always been interested in. I really think that education and open source are two things that really need to go hand in hand. And I'm perfectly willing to expend all of the time and resources that I have available to me to try to make it better and give back to the open source world. I have just some things that I've been thinking about GSOC in the last year or so. I kind of already talked about the first one, but I'm gonna try and make a few changes every year and see how it goes. We have 50 new organizations participating this year. That is a large number. I think we had 26 new organizations last year for comparison. And we're trying sort of a new concept of letting in a lot of these sort of small, cutting-edge open source projects. A lot of bioinformatics projects are participating this year. Some really interesting video and media projects are participating. And we're just going to give them a student or two and see how they do. And try not to burn them out in their first year, as has happened in the past. And see if we can kind of get, my hypothesis is that we have a lot of organizations that are working in the open source world right now, that if they just had an extra developer for a few months, like a GSOC student, that they could really sort of get established in the community and they could really start to make a lot of headway. And so we will see how that hypothesis plays out this year. But I'm hoping that getting these new small organizations involved in GSOC will make a difference overall for the health of the open source community. And in tandem with that, my other idea, which was actually spurred on by some conversations that I had at the Mentor Summit last fall, was we accept all these sort of small organizations and we provide sort of mentorship opportunities between the organizations. And so we've set up this whole other mailing list, and we're subscribing the organizations to the mailing list today, actually. And we have all these established organizations, such as people from KDE and other organizations as well, who will provide sort of mentorship to these new organizations. And I'm trying to basically make it sort of cookie cutter, that if you're an interesting new open source organization, you can just plug into GSOC and have all the materials and resources available to you that you need in order to start to participate and have successful students from the get-go. But I'm always looking for more ways to improve the program, so if you guys have any ideas, and I'm going to make you all talk to me at the end, so get ready. Prepare yourself. I have lots of other ideas, of which some are probably too pie in the sky, but I think GSOC is an awesome program, and I want it to keep growing, and I want to keep infecting more university students with open source software. So, KDE. KDE has participated in Google Summer of Code every year since its inception. Give yourselves a round of applause. That is awesome. And there is, I mean, you guys have a huge organized effort around GSOC every year. And as I was saying to Jeff last night, you don't annoy me either, which is why you keep getting in. No, I'm just kidding. But I think you guys had 50 students last year, I think, of whom 40, of whom 47 passed, I think. I was looking at the numbers last night. I'm pretty sure it was 50. That's a lot of students. That is a huge effort. And that is a really difficult thing to do entirely online, trying to coordinate people from across the globe. And kudos to all of the org admins. Lydia is in here, but everybody in the room, everyone who is involved in GSOC, that is a huge effort. I don't know if I could do that, so that's awesome, and good job. I have a few success stories I wanted to share with you, and I will just say in advance, I am not pronouncing anyone's last name so that I don't butcher it, because that would embarrass everyone. So Martin heard about the program in 2005. There's a few themes that I want to point out here, which is basically that most of these people had already heard about open source software and about not necessarily GSOC, but sort of getting involved well before they actually did. And in addition to that, they stayed with the community after participating in GSOC. And that's kind of the really interesting secret sauce to me. As I said earlier, I think getting students engaged much earlier in the process and getting them interested in open source is really the key. Even if they don't necessarily commit their first patch the first day that they find out about open source, I think getting the exposure is really the important thing. So Martin heard about the program in 2005 and had already been involved. Did his first patch not until December 2007, so 2 years later, but was involved in the community, and then was a student in 2008 for desktop effects. And Leo was involved in high school, and again, the theme here is the exposure early, and was a student in 2007 and a mentor in 2008. Is that correct? Yeah. And again, stayed with the community. And
is there proof?
And he's an organ.
He's an organ. So yes. And then Alex heard about free software at a very young age, and then was a student in 2006. Stayed with the community and became a mentor in 2009. And finally, Tio heard about it on KDE's website. Was a student in 2009. Now has a job because of GSOC and KDE. He's doing contract work at a school, teaching coding and computer skills, and again stayed involved with the community. So this is the part where you guys are going to have to talk to me. Are you ready? Okay. I want to know how it is that you guys keep students involved in the community so well after the program, and how we think that we can replicate that for other organizations. I am really interested and intrigued by KDE's success overall, and there are some other organizations that have managed to do this the same, but by and large, I think that the most important part of GSOC is keeping the developers involved in the community, and I want to know how we can consistently do this. So I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions on, and I realize it's early, so I'm sorry, on how we can make the experience for the students even better, and keep them involved well after GSOC. So I open it up for your comments.
Actually,
Yeah.
I was a student like in 2007, but for WordPress.
Okay.
And just the contrast between, there are no WordPress people.
Selected
Camera.
by 3 organizations.
Yeah.
But I think just knowing our developers and just watching from the outside, because Season of Usability, the Open Usability Project, used to sort of tie into the Google Summer of Code. Our mentors are really, 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 really involved with their students.
Yeah.
And the students become part of the community. They're not these little helpers that are temporarily here for the summer, where my experience in talking to some other people who have also participated in the program, not through KDE, but through some of the other projects, that's not always the case. And so that might be part of the success.
Yeah, I think I definitely have heard that how invested the mentors are in the process makes a big difference. I think if the mentors are already, serious committers and developers for the project, and they're doing GSOC because it's sort of a labor of love for them, that certainly makes a difference. And I think that you're right, the community as a whole probably, I mean, there are certainly more welcoming communities than others. Let's just leave it at that. Yeah, go ahead.
So she talked about community, but to expand on that, I think that, so one thing that KDE does very specifically is we have all the students apply for developer accounts. And when they get those developer accounts, they have full read-write access to all of KDE projects. And that's, they're basically treated the same way as any other developer that came in from any other means. And they're expected to behave that way, and they do.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a good part of it, is that, it's not like they feel like they're just submitting a patch at the end.
they've been committing to actual repositories, and they feel like they have work invested in it.
Yeah, and they're not just little coding monkeys that are kind of out there on the sidelines. They're actually developers.
If we decided to accept your patch, it's like they're just pushing it in, and they're part of it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Adding on to Celeste's point, there's definitely I don't have access to the other participants or the other programs that work with you, but there's very clearly a mentoring the mentor program that we have internally with Lydia and others. When we set it up, there's a very clear set of expectations where the end result is, there's almost like we grade the mentors on the criteria of, did your students or the people being mentored join the community, how robust was their patch, etc. So there's kind of, I wouldn't say scrutiny, but there's an expectation that if you're going to do this, take it seriously. You're not just going to lazily send some emails and responses, that you're being judged as well as a senior member of the community.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Absolutely agree.
I mean, it's a real internship, so you do have to do some teaching. There is an educational aspect to it, and sometimes I think people, at least hosts, look at internships as free, cheap labor.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think having been part of the program for a long time now, we've been able to kind of see what works and what doesn't as well, and just like, we had the same people who have been involved in running it, I think, for a while. That from Tiago originally, and Lydia, and then Jeff and I have also helped out. But it's kind of been a very like a consistent team. So a lot of like knowledge that we can bring from year to year and keep it going, and make sure that we have mentors who will be actually good mentors. We have like a blacklist, of like don't mentor.
I have a blacklist as well. It's for a different thing.
Yeah. And like we need to make sure to have like a 2-week chunk timeline in the application. Otherwise, we know that like students won't be won't have to put the time into the app to really get a good view of what the project is going to be like.
It's so difficult for me to tell when a student has had a good or a bad experience with GSOC. I mean, we have the evaluations, so fair enough. But basically, I mean, if a student passes, I don't know whether or not that student was awesome and had a great experience with their mentor, or if they had a mediocre experience and they're never going to talk to the community again. It's hard for me to get that granularity.
Our size is both a curse and a blessing, because one of the things that we can do is if one of our mentors is misbehaving, we can switch them out, and I think we have done that in the past.
Right. And if they're smaller, then they can't do that.
Right, exactly. So that's there are some advantages to being the size that help out.
Yeah.
I think that's really an important point, that KDE is not only doing the summer of code, but in general it's somehow set up to get new people, to help them, to mentor them, and so on. So what I really found impressive is the season of KDE programs, so that for those students who are not accepted, who are enthusiastic enough to still
which is an
do
awesome program.
That we also can help them, and there's a considerable number of
Tail
students
actually
who do that, so that's
was there first. Tail, did not get into MROC for the summer code the year before he was a student. He still did his project, took more time. It was not ambitious because he had a job, but that kind of got him involved enough that he then chose to try again next year, and then he got in, and then now so it works. And I think it really helps students who want some more structure, who need a more formal mentor, that don't really know where to start, but it is still open source, so you won't get paid for it. It's just like you do your thing anyway. But having a mentor you can like kind of talk to and will guide you through the process is really helpful too.
I think the secret ingredient, really, or not so secret, is passion. I mean, if mentors and students are passionate about what they do, then it will work out.
Yeah. It's so hard. So I just recently did all the screening for all the organizations participating this year, and there are 430 organizations this year participating. And in some ways it's kind of difficult to derive, are you passionate, from an application, I wish that there was like some checkbox that like I could just say, okay, like you guys are just applying to see if you can get in, whereas you guys really actually care about what's going to happen, because I absolutely agree, the passion is what makes the difference. I mean, just talking, sending an email to a mailing list, you can tell whether or not the people who are on it are passionate about what they're doing, or if they're crotchety gray beard people that aren't interested. But there's no way to screen for that, unfortunately. It's really difficult.
Well, what I also saw over the last years somehow developed a that applications for the Summer of Code from students, I guess also from mentoring organizations, got somehow more professional. So the students now know what you have to say and so on. So you see that they become more polished, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are better. It's just that people now just know much better what they have to say to get accepted, and that makes it difficult because it's missing this checkbox. Yeah, I really stand behind that.
Yes, I'm really, really, really interested. I'm very passionate. Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, this isn't a problem we're going to solve in the next 20 minutes, but I'm very curious if you guys have any other ideas on how we can screen better for that, or even if there is some set of guidelines we can give an organization that this is the key to a successful GSOC for your students, sort of thing. I would be very interested. I was just going to open it up for questions. If anybody else has anything, I would be happy to answer questions about GSOC or about Google in general. If you guys have any of those as well. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Knut Irving. I'm working as a community manager in Qt Nokia. So
great.
Okay.
Hi.
And one of the challenges we have with the projects and such is the variety of participants. You have somebody who does not really focus on the tasks ahead, and they deliver, and they may be even flunk on their exam, and then you have others who are really excelling, making great contributions either to the open source project they have participated in, or on the web they make things there.
Yeah.
So how do you kind of handle the diversity?
I think that you mean specifically for the students.
True.
So I think that the way that we handle the diversity is that we, first of all, from the get-go, the organizations we try and choose from a very wide spectrum. So anybody who hears about GSOC potentially could find a project that they are interested in working with. And then within each organization, I think students kind of self-select themselves. I think that the kind of students who is interested in working with KDE is much different than the kind of student who's interested in working with Sahana or OpenMRS or any of the other organizations. And then within each of those organizations, I think that the mentors provide a really good sort of backbone for I know a lot of organizations actually won't choose a mentor for the project until they know the student that's going to work on the project, because then they can sort of match the personalities. And I actually think that's an interesting approach, which is kind of a shame because we want you to provide potential mentors on your ideas list, and that's part of the way we select. But I think that you kind of have to pair up your community with the student after you find out what the student is like, as opposed to trying to sort of fit someone with them because of the project. And overall provide them a lot of avenues dependent on what kind of project and what kind of things that they're interested in. Any other questions? Okay. Yeah.
So you mentioned that Google is involved in a lot of other programs in terms of trying to improve open source education. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was curious specifically what some of the ones that had to do with targeting the high school level students. What other things you're doing in that area?
So we have a whole K through 12 sort of branch of our university programs that are specifically interested in high school and pre-university. A couple people who are based in EMEA, and a couple people who are based in US, and a couple people in Asia as well. The one that sticks out the most in my head is probably the more recent one, which is Google is part of a Blue Ribbon Committee in the US Congress to try and get this education bill passed recently, and I don't know where it is right now. But there was a whole big education bill initiative that Obama was trying to push through. Actually, might still be stalled in Congress because of the change in the representatives. Yeah, they back bills like that all the time. We also, so a lot of the stuff that I do is going to conferences and getting involved in things like town halls with teachers. We have a whole bunch of efforts that for example, in Chicago, we have an office in Chicago, and then we have an outreach program through this K through 12 initiative to basically go out into the high schools and provide them, for example, Google Apps for Education, and give the students potentially give the schools grant money for computers if they need it, and get the students trips to Google and sort of get them involved and interested in computers in general. And that happens a lot in the US, and I'm pretty sure it happens worldwide as well. And then everywhere that we have a data center, we typically reach out to the communities as well, and to the high schools specifically. When I was promoting Google Code-In, I was in Oklahoma, in the middle of Tulsa, and we have a whole outreach program that we do there, and they'll have people come in from Google who speak at the high school and talk about getting a job in computers and CS, and generally trying to reach out more, and then also a lot of initiatives, I think, with the governments as well. So, yeah.
So you just mentioned local initiatives.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you guys have offices in lots of major cities.
Yeah.
Are you thinking of having any sort of making kind of like a base camp for each of those to do local efforts?
Oh, interesting.
So, I know you have a Boston office. It'd be really
yeah.
nice if you guys reach out to Boston schools with that as a base, so it doesn't feel like it's this organization way over on the West
right.
Coast that's trying to meddle over here.
Yeah, well, so the Chicago initiative definitely comes to mind because Fitz and Ben are out in the Chicago office, and they're doing some awesome efforts. I don't think that every office is doing it per se, but I think it's a lot of the major ones. Like, for example, I don't know if we're doing anything in Boston right now.
Yeah, I just wondered if you were going to expand that.
I assume that we would. If we've certainly started the process, it would make sense that we would expand it. But I'm not sure. But that's a very, very good point. I mean, yeah, the local initiatives I think are really the most important thing, as opposed to Google tells you shall make your education better, as opposed to, hey, I work at Google, come talk to me about education and why I'm interested in it, sort of thing. Yeah. Yeah.
There's a question from someone who's listening to the stream from
cool.
the IRC channel.
Yeah.
He asks, what is the usual failure mode for student retention? If there's any common lines why people leave or just fail to plug in, or is that just completely opaque?
So that's actually an interesting question. So there's a few sort of dividing lines in my brain for when students fail GSOC. The first one is inevitably there are about, out of the 1,000 students that we accept every year, there's usually about 10 of them who get accepted, get their $500 and leave, and just fall off the face of the planet. Every year there's some little group of them that happens, and I always get the very panicked emails of, oh my God, our student has disappeared, and
send back the money.
Unfortunately, they got accepted, and so we can't take back the money. We don't give them any more money.
I'm just making jokes because that's a part of the equation you got in there, which make things difficult sometimes.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
So,
if
and
Google
I think
can't find you, you're really gone.
Yeah, that's
true. Fair enough.
You know we like you.
I'm glad. But actually, going back to what you were saying, I think there are a lot of students who have learned now exactly what it is that you need to say to get accepted into GSOC, and for a lot of students, $500 is a lot of money. And if I can just say this scripted thing and get accepted to GSOC and get $500, why wouldn't I spend 10 hours working on that so that I can get $500 and then disappear? So that's the first one. And then inevitably, the next problem is that I think there are organizations as a whole are a little scared to fail students at the midterm. And so I think we have a lot of students who are kind of borderline passing at the midterm, and then they just sort of sink and don't pass the final exam, final evaluation. And I think it's mostly because the community kind of really wants them to succeed and is a little scared of failing them at the midterm. And so then they just, they continue to not really be involved or what have you, and then they fail the final. Having said that, our success rate for our passing rate for students has gone up every year since the program started, and it was 90% last year. So something is getting better. I think organizations are getting better at selecting the kinds of students who are going to stay involved and be interested, certainly. And then I think also, I think the quality of the student application has gone up in recent years. And in particular, doing things like interviewing the students before and making sure that they submit a patch. All these kind of this tribal knowledge is kind of emerging about how to screen a GSOC student. And so it's certainly getting better. But those are kind of the places where students typically fail. Did I answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Any other questions? Awesome. Well, I will be doing a panel later today on education, and so we can talk further about it. But thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.